Hello, adventurers. This is DM Kurt coming at you from the Grognard's Garage, and we're going to start off this video series with a Session Zero and examples and definitions thereof. So, what is a Session Zero? You've probably heard of these. If you're starting a D&D campaign, you're going to want to get together with your players and you're going to discuss, first of all, what kind of game are you going to be playing? Is it going to be survival horror, standard dungeoneering, socio-political game in a large city, or perhaps wilderness exploration? Once everybody has kind of agreed as to what kind of game they're going to play, and it's something you want to run, then we talk about what kind of characters to roll up. Are you going to use a point by generation for or generating statistics, their strength, intelligence, wisdom, etc.? Are you going to use standard array from Player's Handbook, or perhaps dice rolling, which is kind of classic, and a lot of people like a 4d6, pick the best three. So as long as everybody's on the same page with that, that's where you go next is races and classes and alignments and subclasses and source books. Where are we going to allow? Well, what is going to work with your campaign? If you're taking some weird spacefaring race and putting it into a campaign that has no access to spacefaring, then that doesn't make sense. So talk it out amongst your players. For me, I allow anything from Player's Handbook plus a certain stack of source books that I have on the table, and everybody has access to it, and so that we can refer to anything that is a question later on in the game. If you're trying to pull something out of an online source, that's fine if the DM and the players all agree on it. So after that, we need to talk about in-game behavior. You talk to your players about this. Are we going to allow PvP, player versus player, where somebody gets into a disagreement within the party, pulls a sword, and you decide to attack each other? PvP is usually kind of a game stopper, so I advise against it, but that's entirely up to you. But talk to your players about this beforehand. Hey, is this going to be something that if arguments get up to a certain point, are we going to allow that? Ask about that. Treasure division. Now, that's something that's best done beforehand at your Session Zero, before the treasure actually arrives or shows up or is found. Decide how it's going to be divided once you find it, so that we don't have arguments as to whether people are just coming up with ways of division that benefit them. Another example is topics to avoid. Some people get squeamish or just don't like to talk about certain topics. So, for example, you might agree, hey, we're playing a fantasy game. This is not a place to bring up real-world politics in-game. Don't name your character after a current or previous president and decide to act a certain way just as a parody thereof. We're just not interested in doing that. And it's just going to probably cause arguments with people who have different views than you. Do we allow sexual topics or stuff like that coming up? Are you going to want to try to seduce the barmaid? If so, maybe we just kind of fade to black on that and pass that on to just kind of, you just imagine what happens on your own. We're not going to really get too descriptive on that. Are you going to allow, say, some squeamish things? I had to remove giant spiders as a monster from my recent campaign because I had a young player who was squeamish about giant spiders. Okay, fine. Back off of that and just say, okay, those monsters don't seem to notice you, and kind of go off the other direction. And behavior at the table by the players, that's something you're going to have to consider. Do you allow profanity at the table? Do you allow, say, alcohol and minor drug use, smoking, phone use? Are there any things just to kind of avoid in that area? I'm going to give examples of these things as examples of my Session Zero for a game, and I think I'll do an example of Session Zero for this video series. Since we're on the topic, I'll show you examples to let you see one way of doing it. Your way can vary, and that's okay. So, house rules should also be discussed, so that if there's something that doesn't jive with the rules as written for the game, people know in advance and they don't get surprised by it. And I'll give you some examples of that. So, without further ado, let's go with a session 0 for a video series. This video series, for example. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you with helpful information, hopefully, for you as a DM or as a player of Dungeons & Dragons. And I might do reaction videos or response videos to other videographers, any other bloggers, maybe. Not promising that, but it's a possibility. I intend on keeping this series safe for work or PG rated with not a whole lot of profanity, so that you don't have to quickly mute it when somebody's walking by for them hearing profanity. Now, safe for work does assume that we're not doing any pornography, any profanity and whatnot. The fact that you're goofing off at work and watching videos about Dungeons & Dragons, that's probably not safe for your job in most workplaces. So, common sense should prevail on your part there. So, that's it. I am also not going to be posing in front of a bookcase full of role-playing games, or in front or behind a table full of sponsored props, or arranged dice and books just as a prop. Nothing against the people who do that. It's just not what I'm going to do. That's it. That's a video series to be expected. Now let's start with how I run a session 0 for my games. All right, folks. Glad to see that you agreed to. We went with the wilderness exploration route that I proposed. Great. For stats, I want to use the standard array from Player's Handbook so that everybody gets roughly the same stats. Because I know you over there, you roll super awesome on everything when it counts, and Bob over there tends to roll crap, and you're going to have a better character to start off with. Doesn't seem fair. Okay, so you don't like that because standard array is pretty low. Okay, how about standard array plus 2 bonus points to put anywhere you want, and of course that's in addition to whatever racial bonuses the species of your choice gets. Elf or dwarf or whatever, you're +2 to... Okay, sounds good. All right, glad we're on board with that. What species, class, or subclasses? Okay, right there on the table, Player's Handbook, Xanathar's Guide, Sword Coast, and Volos. And, all right, you can use races from Tal to Rye, but that's pretty much already covered. So you can use anything from those books there. Have at it in any combination. Glad to see some of you actually did yours in advance, but for those who didn't, you can get going on this while we cover some of our other stuff. We can't have smoking in the house. Messes with my sinuses real bad. So if you want to smoke, just smoke outside. No marijuana in the house. I have a drug test every now and then, and so I didn't even want the second hand or the smell. Alcohol, well, we don't have any kids in the house, so you can get a little buzzed, but if you get really messed up, you're gonna tear the game apart by being disruptive. So you want to keep it down to a light buzz or less. And keep in mind, we're playing on a Friday night. Our town's cops are out like you wouldn't believe on Friday and Saturday nights looking for drunks. So stay sober enough to drive home. Maybe. Think about it. DUIs are totally expensive. Try to avoid those. Thanks. Okay. Profanity. Anybody have issues with profanity? No? Okay. If I had the kids over here for the weekend, there'd be an ixnay on that. Glad you understand. Who wants to bring snacks? Bring your own. if really phone at the table, okay. Look, if you want to keep your spells and stuff handy on a phone app or your character sheet on a phone app, that's fine. I want to see a paper copy of the character sheet, so you'll have to make sure those two reconcile with each other. But if I hear that Clash of Clans startup music, or I hear you yell out baseball stats for the game that just finished up, that ain't cool. All right. And let's get on to house rules. In my game for house rules, your heavy armor, if you have heavy armor proficiency, I will automatically grant heavy armor mastery feat, the portion of that goes with the damage reduction of 3 points versus every piercing, bludgeoning, or slashing. Piercing, bludgeoning, or slashing. That's right. Hit. 3 points from each hit. Yep, you get the feat if you take the proficiency in heavy armor. We can discuss why. If you're going to play a paladin, a cleric, or a warlock, you'll need to let me know who your character's deity or patron is. We're not going to make that a central point plot too heavily. They will be tied into the game. It'll be for role-playing opportunities and for flavor. But I'm not going to be beating you over the head with your deity requires this, requires that constantly. Just enough to add a little something. And you just have to stay within one alignment step of your deity. Because so that's the house rule on that. Any questions? All right, cool. Thank you. That's the session 0 for the game. And once you get your character sheet made up and rolled up and checked on, we're ready to go. Everybody got their dice? Awesome. Excellent. Let's get rolling. Now that's an example of my session 0 for the podcast and for one of my games. Hope this works out for you, and don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment. Thank you.